Okay, in this tutorial we're going to get our update page going, and this page will allow us to click on the headline on the back end, and it will take us to a page that looks identical to our post page, except these form fields will be populated with the existing information that's in the database or in the stories table, and then be able to edit that page so we can make changes. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our stories page. So you see I'm logged into the back end. So I'm going to take my stories page, I'm going to open it with Dreamweaver, and I'm going to scroll down to that table that we have built. Now if you remember from our delete page that we added this value to our ahref where we had taken the story that we want, the page that it's going to go to, but we passed a story ID along with it. So we're going to do the same thing here for this story headline. So I'm just going to copy this value, or that is the value that's in the href attribute, and then paste it in to this value and then modify it. So clearly what I'm going to do is just change this delete to update story. So I can go ahead and minimize that and take a look at what that's done on the back end. So now you see when I click on the link, it's going to take me to the update page. Now I haven't built it yet, so it's going to say file not found. But if you look at the URL, you can see it's gone to the update story and it's past the story ID 3 value. So that means when I do build this page here in a moment, I can grab that number 3, the story ID 3, out of the URL and then use it to run some queries. So again, remember it's dynamic because of that while statement on the TR, the table row that we built. So when I click on child bites cheetah, it's going to pass its story ID. So we're done with this page now, so I can kind of go to my back end and change stories to green, just so it lets me know that that page is done. And then what I'm going to do, instead of starting with the back-end template, I'm actually going to modify my post page. So I'm going to duplicate, so I'm going to control click the post page and duplicate. And I'm having an issue here with the server, so I'm just going to have to drag this to my desktop. And I'm going to change the file name to updateStory. Then I'm going to drag that back. I'm going to change the color to yellow. Okay, so now if I refresh the page and I click on Man Bites Kitten, it's actually going to show me the post story. So now we're ready to start working on our update page. So I'm going to close the stories. I'm going to click on my update story page. And I'm going to scroll down to this headline where it says post story. I'm going to call this update story. Now, you could build this again from scratch, but since we're dealing with the same values, I like just building the post page first and then modifying it to handle my update. So this is going to be a little tricky for the first time through, but with this tutorial you'll see. So what I need to do is I need to modify certain lines of code. And if you remember correctly, the first thing this page does is check to see if there's a valid user, and it shows our really simple menu item. And then we have a conditional statement that's looking to see if a form has been posted. If the form hasn't been posted, it jumps all the way down to this page where it says else show the form. So this is where we need to start modifying our text, our copy in our page. So the first thing I want to do is you see everything's working fine, but here's my story ID. So let me refresh this. I should say update story now. So what I want to do is I need to grab that number 3 out of the URL down in where my form is showing. So what I want to do is underneath this else statement, I'm going to tab that over just so I can see better. And the first thing to do is I'm going to create a variable for the story ID and then grab the URL out of the bar, and then I'm going to echo it just to make sure that I've actually got the story ID in the page to be used. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a story ID variable. I'm going to make it equal to the get variable, just like we did when we did our delete page. And now I'm just going to quickly echo that story ID. So if I refresh the page, go back to my browser and refresh, you can see now that I have successfully grabbed the story ID 3 out of the URL bar, and if I click on another story, the 2 shows up. So now we can use that story ID value to run a query to grab the values that are related to story ID 2 and then populate these form fields. So what I need to do is get in my code and I need to run a query. Now this is the tricky part. We already have some queries running here. So well, actually I'm going to explain this differently. The first thing I want to do is copy these values that we already have in our table and then adjust the query. So I'm going to Command C, come up here, I'm going to take single notes mode and line out that story ID value, the echo statement. And then I'm going to paste in my database connection and then the rest of this related code, which I can then modify. So I've got my connection error ready, and that's going to be fine because my connection's been working. You know I'm going to change my query here to a select query. This will stay the same, but I don't need this while anymore. So I'm just going to delete the while code structure just so I have the row variable that is being built from the result that has been run through the fetch ASOC function. So again, if I test this page, nothing's going to happen, but I need to run a query. So what I'm going to do here is write my select query. So let me look at my notes here for just a second. Okay, so we're going to run a select query, but we're going to introduce you to a join here. It's in the book. I'll kind of talk about it in class so you can check it out, but you should be able to follow me along and get the gist of the join. And what we're doing with the join is that we're writing a query, we're adding some information into the query so that, because we're querying elements from multiple tables. So first thing we want to do is we want to do select. Now typically we do select all from stories where story ID equals, and then we use our variable. So how we do that is just like this, story ID, and then now we have our query. Now let's go ahead and populate a field just so you can kind of see how easy it is before we come back and really rework this query to do what we need to do for our for our form elements. So actually I'm going to explain this now. The first thing that we need to do is, you see how we have this other query here, and you see how we're using these same variables. Now if we run a query using these variables and we're completed with that query, then that's fine, but we actually need to change these query variables in rows, because once this query runs, and you see the first thing that we have is this drop down menu, that once this query runs with all the same variables, except for the DBC can stay the same, it's actually going to overwrite this query, so we're going to lose this query. So what we need to do is come down here and add a 2 to this. So we're going to do query 2 result 2. Now we can leave the DBC alone, so we change the query 2 here. We're going to make this a result 2 and that row 2, and then we're going to change this to 2. So now if I go back and look at my page and I refresh it, this drop down menu still works, so that's exactly what we want. Like I said, you'll probably notice if you kind of don't follow this tutorial so well, or maybe I didn't put it together very well, that you may run into the problem where you lose your query values. But let's go ahead and simply populate the rest of this stuff with the query, with that simple query from the articles page, from the stories table that we've written. So now all we have to do is we can just copy and paste this. I'm going to change that row back to row, and then I can go to headline, and what we need to do is we need to add a value attribute to this input for the headline. So I'm going to type value, and inside there I'm going to post, or echo the values, and see that I changed that row back to the row variable to match this query, not this one. And if I change story headline, remember it's case sensitive, so I got to make sure I type that correctly. So if I refresh this page, you can see there's the headline just rolled in. I'm going to do the same thing now for each form element. So for story teaser, now you'll notice this is a text area, so we don't do a value here. Excuse me. We don't do the value attribute here. We actually place the PHP and the echo statement in between the opening tag and the closing tag. So I'm going to paste that in there, call this story teaser. I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to do the same thing for story text. I'm going to change that to story text. So if I save that and look at our page, it's good. So now those form fields are now populated with the values that are in the table, not just empty fields anymore. And so now we can go in and edit that, and we're going to take care of that in a bit. But we need to take care of this section. So we need to place the name of the section inside there. To do that, we need to go back to our query here and modify this query. Now we're going to start querying from two tables, the stories table and the section table. And the reason why we have to query the section table is because we need the human readable name of the section, not the story ID. And if you recall that in the stories table, the only section values that we have are foreign key values or numbers. So that's not going to mean anything to someone working on the back end. So we need to get the human readable text. And since we're going to start querying from multiple tables, we need to change our syntax. Now, I don't think I've really explored with you all anything beyond this asterisk. So what we can do here, instead of doing the asterisk, we don't always want every value that's queried from a row in a table. So we can actually start identifying just the tables we want. So what I can do here is story. I want to select story headline from there. I want to select story teaser from there. And I want to select story text from stories, where story ID equals story ID. So instead of using the asterisk symbol, we can start narrowing our query by selecting just the columns values that we want. So if I take a look at the web page and refresh, nothing's going to change because I've queried the same values. But the difference is, I didn't request the story published and the story updated this time, and I don't really need to query everything because I'm not using everything. You'll also notice that I also lost the story IDFK, which I'm going to put back here in just a moment. But since we're querying from multiple tables, we need to add a different sort of syntax here. Now, if we're just querying from one table, just naming the column heads is fine. But since we're going to make a request from two tables, we need to change the syntax of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to type stories.story headline. So what that's saying is I'm selecting from stories the story headline column. So I need to use this sort of dot syntax for all the values I'm querying. So I have stories.story headline, stories.story teaser, stories.story text. And we do need to add another one. So I'm going to add another value. I'm going to add stories.story ID, comma. That's good. I think I misspoke earlier when I was talking about story IDs. I meant section ID FK. So sorry for that mistake. We only have a story ID in that table and then a section ID FK. Okay, so now what we need to do, let's go ahead and just populate the sections first, and then I'll come back to the story ID in a moment. So again, I can refresh this page and nothing will change. But what we need to do is we need to do a left join and bring on those human readable values from the sections table. So what we do after this, we have select all our values from stories, and then we have our limiter where story ID equals story ID. What we need to do is we need to amend that to say from stories, left join the sections. Whoops, I forgot the word join. Left join the sections table. So we're left joining sections, and then we want to join it on, and this is where we do a little equation to say where to join this. So what we're going to do is we're going to left join sections on stories dot section idfk equals sections. So we're saying that we want to join it on this column and make it match up where the section ID out of stories is equal to the section ID in the sections table. So let's go ahead and save that and see if I wrote that query correctly. And I did. Nothing broke. But what the trick is now, we have to go back to this area where we're selecting our elements, and we need to add in the sections.section. So I'm going to do, after the story text, the last column selection, I'm going to write sections dot section, and that's all I need. I don't need the ID. So now I'll save that and make sure my query is working correctly. Okay, everything's running well. So all I have to do is go down into my section right here, and I can copy and paste one of my echoes that's echoing one of the objects out of the row array, and I'm going to populate this first drop down now with section. So now when I refresh my page, you'll see now that where when we were first posting we left this blank because by default we didn't want to put it in the wrong section, but now on the update page we want that first drop down menu to be populated with the value that already exists, and then underneath that first one will be the alternatives. So what I need to do now is just refresh my page, and there you see news. So if I go back and I hit I think that was they're both. So if I sick man bites kitten, I both have them in the sections. So now we've got it populated our field. So I'm going to wrap this tutorial up, and then the second part we're going to post all this information and then not insert it into the database, but update. Oh, actually there's one last thing I need to do here. Remember I had said I was going to come back to that story ID. So we selected that story ID. What we need to do is we need to create a little invisible form field so we can hide the story ID value and post the story ID value so we can catch it. And I think we might already have that in there, but I could be wrong. So yeah, we don't. So we need to add a hidden form field here. So what we need to do is that we need to create, sorry, I'm checking my notes here. We need to create a hidden form field so we can insert the story ID value and make it kind of go past to the next page. So when we post the form, the story ID value goes there. I don't have this in my notes, so I'm going to work from memory here. So all we have to do above this label is that we're going to input, and we're going to do type, and what we're looking for is hidden. And then we want to have the value of that be the story ID. Now there's two ways we could do this. We could echo the story ID we requested from our query, or we can just use the variable. I'm going to go ahead and just use the one we requested from our query. So I'm going to paste that in there and change this to story ID. And then save that. Now when I take a look at my post page and refresh the page, you see nothing different visually here, but if you look at the source code, you can see there's my hidden field, and it has the value 3. So what I need to do now is I actually need to go back and add an attribute for name and call it story ID. So when it's posted up to the top, we can update the page based on its story ID that's been passed. So I'm going to go back and fix that real quick. So I'm going to give it the name attribute, name equals, and it's going to be story ID. So that concludes this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we'll finish this process and actually make some corrections and post the values and get it updated in the table.